How's it going? I'm Matt from MAS Epoxies, and today I'll be your co-pilot showing you the exact steps needed to perfectly cast a slab of wood in our deep pour epoxy resin. Alright, so to kick things off, we're going to seal the wood thoroughly with penetrating epoxy. Now, this is a really critical step that a lot of people overlook, and then they're wondering why they have bubbles in their final finish. The wood has a porosity, and all species are different. But as the epoxy penetrates into the wood, it displaces the air that's trapped inside it, which causes bubbles. So the trick is, seal your wood before you cast it in epoxy. Make note how the epoxy is kind of wicking right into those really dry spots. It's kind of punky, a little bit rotted. That's a slab of walnut that has seen better days. The penetrating epoxy, even if you don't cast it in resin, if it's just a piece of rotted wood on your windowsill or something like that, it can rejuvenate it, bring it back to life, give it a little more strength. So a lot of different applications for penetrating epoxy. Alright, on to my favorite part, measuring the epoxy. It's actually not my favorite part, but deep pour is a 3-to-1 mix ratio, or you could do it by weight, which would be 100 to 28. And if you have any questions about that, you can always just call our technical support. We'll walk you right through it. For the colorant, we used Pinata alcohol ink, and it gives it like a slight black tint. It's still translucent. You could use mica powder, which would make it opaque, but it's all personal preference. So if you look closely, you'll see some bubbles on the surface of the epoxy, and that's completely normal. Whenever you mix it, you could whip air into it. Whenever you pour it, some air could get lapped into it. And the great thing about deep pour is the open time is really long, 4 to 6 hours, depending on the conditions in your shop. And what that translates into, plenty of time for the bubbles to raise to the surface and pop, right? So it also works both ways. If you have wood that you didn't properly seal, those bubbles could, as the epoxy penetrates into it, those bubbles can continue to form up until it gels. At that point, you just kind of have a bunch of little trails of, it looks like a guy underwater with a diving mask on, with bubbles just kind of popping up out of the wood. So keep that in mind. Really make sure you get a good steel coat. And with deep pour, you can only go up to 1 inch at a time. So that's why we're doing the second step pour. We let the first coat set up, and then we came back the next day, mixed up another batch, and poured that one. There's a couple different rules of thumb on when you can do another pour. So, once the epoxy warms up, does its chemical reaction, and cools back down to room temperature, you can make another pour. If you let it sit overnight, you come back and you can take your fingernail and make an impression in it, then it's safe to do another pour without any kind of mechanical action. If you jam your fingernail into it and you can't make an impression, and you're going to have to scuff it up with some sandpaper, then you can do another pour. But it's all based off the conditions in your shop. So if you have any questions about that, or when you can and can't do another pour, always give us a call. We'll be glad to help you out. Alright, now that we got it demolded, we scuffed it up with some 220 grit sandpaper. That mechanical action protects it from delaminating, so it gets a good mechanical bond between the two layers. So deep pour, tabletop, they're backwards compatible. You can pour one on top of the other as long as they're properly cured. Everything works. Now, what we did was take a little bit of blue painter's tape and made a dam around the side to kind of show that once you spring a leak, you can't actually stop it. The glue on the tape is kind of compromised and it just drips off. So it doesn't do you much good to try to dam it up like that. Little roll off the sides, calculate in about 20% waste, and you should be good. Gloss over with a torch, pop all the bubbles, do that about every 10 minutes for about 25 minutes, and you'll have a perfectly clear, awesome finish. That about does it, guys. Thank you much.